Why is my light flickering? Come on now. Stop. Okay. I was afraid I was going to have to buy a new light there. Today we're going to be talking about the Larders of Ill Omen. This is kind of like the basement of Castle Ravenloft if it didn't have an even deeper basement where they stored all of the dead bodies. On the whole, I think this is a pretty good area. There really wasn't a whole lot for us to do here in terms of improvements and drastic changes. What we have done is make some minor adjustments here and there to make this a more engaging area for your party and to give them a bit of a taste of Barovian history, or at least Strahd's history. First up, we have one of my favorite changes, and it's to area K61, the elevator trap. Just get rid of the damn thing. Seriously, get rid of it. Delete it. It's not there. Never built it. For one, why is there an elevator in Barovia? Are they worried about accessibility? And you know what? I've never seen or heard of anybody running this thing that has had a good time. Not a dungeon master, not a player. I have actually asked. Nobody. Not a single person. So, nix it. Next up after that, we have the Servants' Hall. This is where your party's most likely going to meet Cyrus Belview for the first time. Cyrus is Strahd's mongrel folk servant kind of guy. He's the Igor to Strahd's Dr. Frankenstein. He wanders around, does a whole bunch of stuff, plays with bones. He's a weird kind of guy. Now, in the module, he tries his best to lead your party into the elevator trap, but since we're getting rid of that, it's kind of a moot point. He's not going to do that anymore. Instead, he's just going to kind of try to usher them up to area K49, the lounge, where he believes they should be waiting for Strahd. Once he's done that, if the party hasn't harmed him in any way, I know it's a long shot, he's going to try to return to area K66, his room, and he's going to write some notes down about the party, their behavior, their looks, and all of that, and he's going to send it off to his actual boss. More on that in just a little bit. Moving down the list, we have area K63, the wine cellar. There's really not a whole lot going on in this room beyond a few barrels that contain hazards like mold and slime and other weird stuff that I don't think wine actually turns into. What we've done is make this area a bit of an Easter egg. So if anybody in your party succeeds on a DC 13 perception check or has a passive perception of 17 or higher, they are going to find 5 bottles of Champagne de l'Estampe behind a loose brick. Now this was a vintage that is thought lost throughout Barovia. The winery can't make anymore because that gem, the gem that was responsible for that vintage, is gone. Lord knows where it's at. But here's 5 bottles, and it is a literal priceless treasure throughout the land, and there's at least 2 drunken frat boys in Vallaki, assuming they're alive, that will try like hell to buy it off of your party. Before we go on to any further areas, you should know that you can get the written version of this guide on Patreon by pledging just as little as $1. You get this guide and all of the other Lunch Break Heroes guides to download and keep forever. And did you know we also have a Discord server? If you're not on there, you should be. All right, that being said, on with the next area. Next up, we have area K65, the kitchen. This was always a really weird area for me as I was reading the book. It's basically Rob Zombie's idea of what a kitchen would be in a horror house. It's got body parts here and there, it's got blood-encrusted cleavers, a stew pot full of zombies. It's insane. I get it, the vampires don't actually need to eat, but you know what? They're not the only ones residing in the castle. There are actual living, breathing beings that need to eat real food. And let's not forget the dinner invitation that Strahd sends to your party when they've done something notable. Where does that food come from? It's got to come from the kitchen. And you know what? This is not a functional kitchen. So while we're not changing it to something that Gordon Ramsay would be proud of, it's something real. When your party gets to this area, they're going to be met with some pretty pleasant smells. If they go inside, it's going to be relatively clean. No body parts or anything like that. Now, that's not to say that this is a safe area by any means. That pot that was in the middle of the kitchen, sure, there's no zombie parts in there, but now it's a mimic, a pet mimic that Cyrus likes to feed. And it is pretending to be a kettle pot. If any character except for Cyrus walks within 5 feet of this mimic, it's going to open up and it's going to try to swallow them and dunk them into its, I want to call it soup, but let's not consider what it actually is. You can find the stat block for this mimic down in the description below. Here we are at area K66, the Butlers Quarters. This is where Cyrus actually lives and spends what little spare time he has. This is a hoarder's hell. You've seen hoarders, right, on TLC? Well, this makes those places look neat by comparison. It's full of discarded trash and adventuring gear that he's picked up from dead adventurers. It's all rusted and damaged, none of it's useful. If your party's not careful when they enter the room, they're going to send a tidal wave of crap falling inward that's going to create a very loud noise and alert Cyrus if he's within any reasonable distance, let's say like 60 or 100 feet or so. In the room, they're going to find, of course, Cyrus's bed tucked away in the corner, but they're also going to find a writing desk. Now, this desk is the only functional area within this room. If your party succeeds on a DC 13 perception check, they can search the desk and find some notes that Cyrus has scribbled down. You see, Cyrus is a spy for the Abbot over in Krezk. He's not just here to serve Strahd, he's working for the Abbot and sending information back on the goings-on in Castle Ravenloft, Strahd's moods, his behaviors, people that come and go, like your party, for instance. He's a pretty terrible spy, to be perfectly honest. Strahd knows all about what he's doing, and he's read basically everything. And he even feeds misinformation here and there to suit his own purposes. If that perception check succeeds by 3 or more, your party will also find a set of keys within the desk that will unlock all of the cells down in the dungeon, which we're going to talk about in our next Castle Ravenloft video. Next up, we have area K67, the Hall of Bones. Now, remember in our Argynvostolt video, the skull of Argynvost is no longer in this room. We have actually moved it to the swamps of Berez. Now, in this room is something a bit more interesting, I think, and a bit more informative for your characters. This room is full of the spirits of all of those bone owners. Bone owners. Boners. Get it? If your party stays within the room for at least a few minutes, they're going to start to hear these discordant whispers pressing in on them. They're very urgent and they sound very pained and tragic. And if they listen really hard, it's almost as if they're trying to get the character's attention. At that point, they have to succeed on a DC 12 Wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they're going to take 4d10 psychic damage. If they pass, however, the spirits take form and they can see these ghostly figures all around the room. And these figures will then offer to answer one question. You decide what is reasonable for these ghosts to know. There's so much that I can't even account for whether the ghosts would know it or not, so that's up to you. The answer may be short or cryptic, but it is always correct. Once the question has been answered, the ghosts fade away, and this whole process cannot be repeated for at least 24 hours. Last up for the Larders of Ill Omen is area K70, the Kingsman Hall. This is where Strahd's guards once hung out back when, they were alive, and Strahd was alive too. When your party enters this room, they'll notice that it is cold, deathly cold, and a lot colder than the surrounding rooms. If they look closely within the corners of the rooms, they can see these dark shapes. These are actually shadows, but not hostile like they may be used to. These shadows almost look as if they're cowering in fear, and under each one is a dark stain on the stone floor. In the room with them is the Shadow Demon. We've pulled this out of area K72, Rahadin's office, because why is a Shadow Demon hanging out there? Is he his freaking secretary? And we've put it here as an aspect of Strahd's violent past. The episode that took place in this room left such a psychic rift in the world, in the weave, that it created this almost shadow play of what happened. If your party lingers here for any period of time, they're gonna see this scene play itself out once again, just as it had hundreds of years ago. The large shadowy figure is going to violently attack these smaller shadowy figures who try in vain to defend themselves. They can almost hear the screams echoing out through the centuries. And the shadows, they aren't going to be able to defend themselves. This Strahd shadow, as it were, just rips into them. If the party enters the fray and attacks this larger shadow, it will turn away from these smaller shadows and engage the characters. For every one of those shadows left alive at the end of this encounter, one party member is going to receive 5 temporary hit points. Now this encounter contains 6 of these shadows, so that's an opportunity for somebody to receive 30 temporary hit points. That's no joke, even at higher levels. And you know what? They're really gonna need that when they head down to the lower levels, the catacombs, which we are going to be talking about in our next video, so stay tuned, and if you haven't done so, click subscribe.